MZTV.
So it's not like Jesus is right and Paul is wrong. Jesus is the heavy hitter. Paul is the biblical wannabe who says some things that are different than Jesus, therefore we have to throw him out of the Bible. Many people think that Paul should be thrown out of the Bible. This is true. There are sects in the world who understand that Paul's writings and Paul's declarations are so out there, they're so weird, that the guy doesn't even belong in the scriptures. I haven't told you this in a while. Back when I was studying these things back in the early 80s, I noticed a very unique thing. Well, to me, it was quite noticeable, and it had profound implications. I discovered in 1982 something called the Concordant publishing concern. And they were the first ones who convinced me through really scholarly expositions, through, of course, a right translation of the scripture, that there really was something different about this Paul guy and his 13 letters to the nations. Now, I instinctively knew this while reading the scriptures between 1979 and 1982. 1979 was when I bought my first Bible. It was a New American Standard Bible. I was so excited, being a Catholic. Was I still a Catholic then or an ex-Catholic? I was becoming an ex-Catholic in 1979. And I went and got my first NASB. I was very excited. I was actually buying the Bible. That is like, be careful if you're a Catholic and you're buying your own copy of the scriptures. Watch out, the Pope could be breathing down your neck, and they're putting tinder under the stake, or they're going to burn you. But I read the scriptures through the whole thing. I just read the whole book. Then I read it again, and I'm thinking, yes, there's something different about this guy. So I found out from the Concordant publishing concern, whoa, yes, my instincts were correct. Something very different about Paul. But it's so interesting that Martin Luther also saw Paul saying things like justification apart from works, faith, complete by faith, salvation by faith. Martin Luther came to the end of himself, realized there's nothing good in him, and that he had died with Christ. He gets this from Paul, and he's trying to, but Martin Luther, he reads the book of James, and Luther is on record as saying that James was, quote, an epistle of straw. And I think that Martin Luther went so far as to say that James should be excised from the scriptures. Yeah, just get rid of James. He's so different. He's not with the program. He doesn't have the beat. He just is behind the times. James should read Paul. And then, see, Luther never realized. You and I are coming into things that this great theologian who invented the Lutheran Church, you might say, didn't know. He didn't know the salvation of all. He didn't know that there were two different gospels. We do. We're not famous. But, okay, there's the Concordant publishing concern. A great help for me. Also, the publishers of the Concordant Literal New Testament. At the same time, I was getting literature from a place called Destiny Publishers in Merrimack, Massachusetts. Now, Destiny Publishers was the opposite of the Concordant. They were into Israel stuff. They were into identifying who were Israelites, the lost 10 tribes, that kind of thing. They were zealous for the law. They loved the idea of the 1,000-year kingdom, and they had an antenna for that frequency. And in their literature, there were tracts trying to convince their readers that Paul belonged in the Bible. Now, back to the West Coast, I'm not saying that the Concordant publishing concern even went as far as Martin Luther that Peter doesn't belong in the Bible, but they definitely had Peter in his rightful place as one who was continuing the circumcision gospel as passed on to him by Jesus Christ. He was refusing to jump onto Paul's gospel, although he gave Paul the right hand of fellowship. So when you read the Concordant literature, you understand that Peter's great, good old Peter, great disciple, way to walk on water, dude, that was awesome. But Paul has a higher revelation. And here on the East Coast, Destiny Publishers in Merrimack, Massachusetts, trying to make excuses for Paul. So it's anybody with an honest mind, and it's any kind of objective at all, they will see that there's differences here that can't be ignored. And I've been going over 31 of them. I'm going to finish up probably this week, unless I get on another sidetrack like I have today. But I believe that I think the Concordant literature, the Unsearchable Riches magazine began in 1909. And I believe that God raised up this body, which is not something you can join. It's not a church. It's not an organization per se. Raised him up to feed the body of Christ. Feed the body of Christ through literature that honors the differences between Paul and Peter, between the Gentiles and the circumcision. And again, I cut my teeth on that stuff. But at the same time, in the wisdom of God, he had me listening to this other stuff. And I didn't find these things contradictory. So I'm getting literature also from Destiny Publishers, talking about the kingdom on earth, talking about Israel. And these guys were good. They were very good. They were very scholarly. And I thought, how interesting that in the United States of America, where probably many of the lost tribes of Israel are, I've spoken about this before, who have lost their national identity because the house of Israel has been scattered over the entire face of the earth. On the East Coast, the traditional coast, right? The East Coast is the traditional coast. The coast of our forefathers. Boston, Philadelphia. We have the traditional gospel. And I say traditional. I call the circumcision a traditional gospel because it dates back to Abraham. 2100 BC, Abraham is called. And so this gospel is in accord with the fathers. I don't think it's coincidental. It's on the East Coast. Now you have the radicals on the West Coast. The West Coast of the United States is a radical coast. It's where they say that whatever trend starts in the United States starts on the West Coast and moves east. I don't think they're particularly intelligent over there, with the exception of course, the Concordant publishing concern. But not only do we have Paul on the West Coast and Peter on the East Coast, but we have these as far away as possible as you can get in the continental United States. And so God did this for me, I think, so that I was not simply versed in one body of literature at the expense of another body of literature. That's why I can look at this passage that I read to you yesterday, and you can say, well, either Jesus is right or Paul is right. No, I say this. Here's the key to the whole thing. Jesus and Paul are saying two different things. Oh, well, Martin, you're pitting the words of Christ against the words of Paul. My answer to that is no. Paul's words are the words of Christ. I must continually remind you that a common denominator between the gospel to Israel and the gospel to the Gentiles is that Jesus Christ is the bringer of both gospels. This is why the nations with confidence could latch on to Paul's gospel, because it was legit. It's not like some crazy rogue thing where this lunatic Saul invented it. Gonna make a new religion here. Or it was brought to him by some shady guy with sunglasses carrying a briefcase. Like, I got a new gospel for you people. Come closer, little girl. No, it came in great glory, so it's legit. And it's so interesting that this argument comes right down to today. I am feeling privileged to be a part of what I call first century drama. When I say first century drama, they were arguing back when Peter and Paul were alive at the same time, contemporaries, eating at the same picnic table in Antioch. It was so interesting. It was so wonderfully confusing. There was a new restaurant in town. You see, if there's only one restaurant in town, nobody argues about where to eat. So it's simple. The only way, for thousands of years, the only way that you could know the true God, the God of the universe, the God who made the stars, who put the planets into place, who formed humanity out of the ground, the only way to know that God was to come through Israel. And God gradually revealed himself. Yes, he revealed himself in creation. He revealed himself through the stars. And as we look through the book of Genesis, we see gradually God revealing more and more of himself. And when he calls Abraham in 2100 BC, God is saying, okay, now I'm going to really start to let people know who I am. And through Abraham, he creates a nation, Israel. And when Moses is on the mount and he gets the law, the tabernacle system begins, and God begins to reveal even more of himself. He has a structure on the earth that is a picture of further and further revelations of himself. We have now a way to deal with sin. We have really the knowing of sin, a more detailed knowing of sin because of the law. We finally find out what God likes, what God doesn't like. Didn't know that before. And we have prophets in the Old Testament who are bringing forth things that God is going to do. It's progressive revelation. There's only one way to know God, and that's through Israel. Now, all of a sudden, in the first century, subsequent to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, as Saul is on the road to Damascus, God is just can't wait to reveal the depths of his grace that have never been revealed before, and he does it through Saul. He gives him a message, and it's so exclusively his that he calls it my gospel. This is my gospel. So this guy now brings a new restaurant in town, and now everybody's arguing about where to go. But I think this is delightful. I actually love this. I think it's exciting. I think it's fun, and it's not that complicated, because now most Israelites, when they heard of this Paul, they wanted to kill him, let alone join him. You're not going to join Paul. They wanted him out from the face of the earth, gone, because he was saying you didn't have to do law. He was saying you don't have to be baptized. That's what he was telling the Greeks, because it was true, because this was a new gospel, the depths of God's grace. So most Israelites were sticking with the traditional gospel. They're staying in Merrimack, Massachusetts. They're reading books from Destiny Publishers. Paul is, of course, Mr. West Coast, Mr. Radical. So if a Jew responded to Paul's message, yeah, he or she jumps ship to join Paul. What about the Greeks? Is it true that there were some members of the nations that would attach themselves to Israel? Yes, they were called proselytes or God-fearers. The proselyte was a more hardcore follower of the Israel message. They did the law, they were circumcised, but the God-fearer, which we read about the first one coming in to the Israel message in Acts chapter 10 through the mediation of Peter, they're more loosey-goosey. They don't follow the law, but they give alms. They love the people of the covenant. These people, they would be the most apt to look at Paul and go, yeah, maybe we'll join Paul. But as we saw many things in the Old Testament, like Ruth and Naomi and the Gibeonites, there's people who love Israel. They love Israel. And even though this sexy new woman's coming into town, this Paul with his no baptism, no law, pure grace, yeah, that's an attraction over here. But they're not going to go for that because they're in love with Israel. But what's great is now you have quote-unquote options. I say options because that's only as it is relatively presented on the stage. Absolutely speaking, of course, God gives each. He calls the circumcision from the disruption and the uncircumcision from before the disruption. So everyone who hears either message is predisposed to hear that message. The hardware, the antenna to receive it is already programmed by God. And these various evangels are broadcast then, just like radio waves are broadcast, flying through my room right now, flying through yours. And whoever has a predisposition to hear that one, they will hear it. But I think it's fun. I think it's more enjoyable to have two. I think it is raucous. I think it's beautiful. And I think that in this case, yes, two is better than one.